Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Star Wars Generations podcast. Friends, if you listen to any of our back episodes, you probably know that Danielle, aka Written in the Star Wars author, she's writing on a number of websites that we'll talk about, podcast guest, TikTok creator extraordinaire, Twitter creator extraordinaire, and probably one of the top fan clones and thirsters has been a regular guest with us. After Rex and Wolfe showed up in the same episodes, I knew we had to get her on. We wanted to get her on for some point. This I knew was the time. Danielle, how are we living in Clone Land?
Oh, it's great. It's wonderful. It's a great time to be a Clone fan, especially a Wolf fan. Uh, for
Mm-hmm.
me, anyway.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about you, your background with the show and with the clones. And like, when did you first watch this show? What was your feeling about the clones? How did this all develop?
Mhm. Well, I started watching the show when I was younger, when it was first coming out, but sporadically, because it was
Uh-huh.
just any time it was on, I watched it, but I hadn't seen all of the episodes until like the first month of lockdown back in
Mm-hmm.
2020 when season 7 was coming out. We got Disney Plus, and for the first time, I was like, "Oh my god, all the episodes are here. I can actually watch the whole thing." And I'd never been able to do that before, so I actually sat down and watched it all and watched the very last episode of season 7, I think,
Mm.
when it came out. And I immediately attached onto the clones.
Mm.
I
How come?
wasn't really sure why at that time, but I felt like really connected to them. I really liked their story, and I liked seeing it continued in Rebels. And from there on, it grew into an
Yeah,
obsession, kind of. And I started my TikTok, and it snowballed from there.
that's awesome. That's awesome. We're gonna have a lot more to say. I want to just say a quick thing though. If you like this podcast, if you want to learn more, please you can subscribe and find us on all the places on social media. We love feedback. Any thoughts you have about this, about upcoming episodes, anything like that, please send them in. We would love to talk with you about that. The graphic here is for my superhero ethics podcast, but that's also true about this, the Star Wars Generations podcast. And of course, the best thing you can do, not only to support us, but also to get all the even more content, is become a member. For only $5 a month, $55 a year, you get bonus episodes. At the end of every episode, there's bonus content. Most, sometimes we miss it, but about 90%, I think we hit it. There's all sorts of ways. So please become a member. Please hit like and subscribe to make sure you get more posts like this. And please send in your feedback and let us know. So Danielle, what is it about Rex? Let's start with Rex first, because recently you have been doing on your TikTok a number of series about Rex and about all the reasons why you love him, all the things that he means to you. Let's talk Rex.
Yes. Well, I started doing Rex's Greatest Hits a couple years ago, I think, or maybe
Mhm.
last year. And that started as just a series of going through all of Rex's like biggest moments in canon. And starting from the Clone Wars movie, going all the way through Rebels. And every week, that's what I did. And then from there, it became just a weekly kind of like, let's talk about different things about Rex that were
Hmm.
on my mind. And then the last couple of months, I started Rex's Greatest Sad Hits
Mm,
because I was excited about him being back in the Bad Batch, and I wanted to kind of continue my series in a different way.
right.
And so I decided to start doing the top 10 Rex moments that make me cry.
Mm,
And it was a lot of revisiting some of the stuff I'd done in my previous Rex's Greatest Hits series, but
hmm.
from a different angle, focusing more on the emotional aspect of it and what about it triggered that response in me, I guess.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun to do. My last one, so number 1, I just posted right before this. so so after 10 weeks, that part of Rex's Greatest Hits is now
Nice.
over. And I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'll be thinking about it. I just
No,
love him.
there will absolutely be a link to everything Danielle is talking about in the show notes, including her TikTok. And let's just quickly review. So for those folks who maybe they don't remember all the details, and please correct me, but my understanding is that Rex is the commander of the Legion of Clones that Anakin Skywalker and then Ahsoka Tano are both leaders of. And so Rex is one that we see all the time because he's often working with Anakin. And that he later goes on to have a very important role during Order 66, where Ahsoka is able to unchip him, and then he works with Ahsoka to kind of help save her from Order 66. And he then goes on to have a very long history. He becomes an important figure in Rebels. There's some great stuff between him and Kanan about Jedi and clones, kind of putting back past their animosity. And he has been, and as we just saw in the last couple of weeks, continues to be a kind of mentor figure and a contact with the rest of the clones to the Bad Batch. Is that kind of an accurate summary? You made a face at some point, so I think I said something wrong. But
it's just funny because Rex actually isn't the commander until season 7 when he goes with Ahsoka to Siege of Mandalore, and he only becomes commander because they need a commander to go, and Ahsoka is no longer Commander Tano. She's not a part of the Order anymore, so she can't technically lead the 332nd, but Rex could if he was a commander.
Right.
And so Anakin promotes him to that position after years of just in air quotes being a captain. But there's a lot of headcanons about why that is, because he's not a CC. Like, you have Commander Wolfe and Commander Cody, who are all CCs, not CTs. Right. And Rex is a CT. And so
and what do those each stand for?
CT stands for Clone Trooper. And CC stands for Clone. It's debatable whether it's Clone Commander or Clone Commando, because you have Clone Commandos who are also CCs. So it falls under usually like different types of training that they're given, I believe.
Right.
And they usually, from what we understand, go straight into the role of commander from Camino. At least the first ones did. So like Cody, for example. But Rex doesn't have that CC. And it was probably just something they didn't really think people would catch on to or like question why. But there's tons of headcanons about why that is, that Rex just maybe showed a lot of promise during his training. And so even though he was originally designated CT 7567, they went ahead and put him, he rose through the ranks in such a way that he was able to become only a captain, not a commander, but he was still able to essentially lead the 501st with Anakin.
Well, and I guess that's the best way to put it. Yeah, it's not Anakin and Ahsoka are obviously the commanders. It's that he's kind of like the highest ranking clone in that group. He's their liaison kind of thing. And actually, the way you say that, and this might be complete headcanon on my part, but I feel like it would make a lot of sense. Not only that Rex is incredibly talented, like I think he's proven again and again to be a great leader, but also Anakin is someone who deeply values personal connections and loyalty and doesn't really care about the rules. And so he would say, I think Rex is great. I don't give a damn what everybody else thinks or what official title he has. I'm making him my sergeant to my lieutenant or whatever it is. Yeah. He's going to be the main guy I work with the clones because of how I feel about him, and to hell with all the rules. Does that fit what you think happens?
Yeah, I think so, because now this is where I have to think very carefully if I'm thinking of canon or I'm thinking of head canons. But I think it's generally accepted that, because Rex was an ARC trooper before he was captain. And I think it's generally accepted that he was an ARC trooper for maybe the 212th. So Obi-Wan's back, because the Clone Wars started before Anakin became a Jedi Knight and before he became a general in his own right. And so he didn't yet have command of a Legion battalion of clones. And there are guesses that Rex was an ARC trooper for the 212th. And then when Anakin became a general, he was like, I want Rex.
Yeah,
I want Rex with me, like you said. So I feel like that's if it's not canon, I feel like that's probably likely what happened. Yeah.
Certainly no one would say Anakin having a commander of the clones who doesn't fit doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And am I right that, like, I've never actually measured it, and I'm not thinking you have, but it certainly feels to me that Rex is the clone who, in the shows, we get to know the best. Like, he has, there are other clones who play an important role, and Cody is the only named one who's in the movies, but in the Clone Wars, at least, and of course, obviously in Rebels and other shows, Rex feels like the one who we kind of see the most. Do you think is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah, I'd say that he and Fives probably have the most well-rounded arcs
Mm-hmm.
of clones in the Clone Wars,
Right.
in that series. And I think Fives happens kind of all at once. Rex's takes place throughout the series.
Right.
And I think that's the difference between them is that we really like we get Fives in like an arc and a half,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have his death arc essentially.
Right.
And then but that's where we get to know him the best, really. And so it happens in bunches, but very quickly. And Rex's, we start learning about him really from the movie, and then
Right.
that continues in a steady thread throughout the rest of the seasons.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And so let's then talk about Wolf, because for me, as someone who is, I really love the clone stories, but I confess that I tend to focus that more on like the idea of like created soldiers, and soldiers don't really get to choose this, rather than many of the individuals, though each of the individuals has some incredible stories. For me at least, it always seemed like there's Rex, there's Fives, and then there's a bunch of others who each get like a little bit of time, but none to the extent that those two did. What is it about Wolf that makes him in particular so important to you?
I think I think it really has a lot to do with Rebels, because
Mhm.
Rebels gives him a certain like amount of like meat to his character that the Clone Wars doesn't. I think that
Yep.
there's a lot in the Clone Wars that adds to what his role is, and we can piece together things about his character from those episodes. But I don't think it would be as coherent of a piece without Rebels. And Rebels gives us a Wolf who has been very damaged by Order 66 or by the
Mhm.
Empire, and who is confused and paranoid, but ultimately wants to do the right thing. And and who above all cares about his brother's safety.
Yeah.
That is his main goal. Everything he does that we see in Rebels is to protect his brothers.
Mhm.
And from there, you can piece together things from the Clone Wars episodes that he's in, and from some of the comics he's in that aren't necessarily canon, or they are, but they're kind of like a lower tier of canon, I think.
Yeah.
Um, about him from there, that he's very loyal. He takes his job very, very seriously. And that loyalty, when it's in favor of the Republic, goes to like Plo Koon,
Mhm.
and that he becomes a very honorable person. Wolf does,
Right.
and a very caring person, but who still does his job when he needs to. And when that gets manipulated by the chip, that loyalty kind of shifts. And I can see very easily after these last two episodes of the Bad Batch, how that could eventually lead to paranoia,
Uh-huh.
that we see in Rebels.
Right. Well, and I think that's so important. And I want to talk more about. Let's actually talk about him in the. No, let's talk about him in Rebels first, and then we'll get to him in the Bad Batch specifically, because just to kind of spell out what we're talking about with his loyalty and how sometimes it can wind up being not what we in the audience want to see when our heroes in Rebel. So by the time of Rebels, 15 years after Order 66, about 13 years after where we are in the Bad Batch story right now, we've gotten to a point where Rex, Wolf, and the one other who feels a lot like Wrecker to me, but I can't ever remember his name.
Gregor.
Gregor, thank you. Are off on this other planet, and they're basically like, kind of, they're retired. They're done with fighting. They hunt these big beasts that taste really good, apparently. They're just kind of living life and want to just be undisturbed. And when the rebel crew shows up, who are everyone knows they're wanted, and they kind of want to bring Rex and the other clones back into the fight. Um, I think it is Wolf who winds up turning them in and calling the Empire on them. Am I correct there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk more about that decision he makes, because I feel like it is such an important part of his character, and it would be so easy to look at that and say, therefore, he's the bad guy. Clearly, you have different feelings, so I really like I do too, but I want to hear you spell it out some more.
Yeah, people always give Wolf a hard time for that, but I think it's very clear that he doesn't he doesn't mean like for the bad intentions, if that makes sense. Like he knows what will
Right.
happen, but it's because those people aren't his primary concern. His primary concern are his brothers. And we know that this isn't really representative of who he is because of how Rex reacts to what he did.
Right.
Rex is stern with him, but he's not angry. And his Rex's primary concern is getting Wolf to understand that this isn't how he really thinks, and that he knows that the
Right.
Jedi aren't a threat to them, and that the Jedi didn't betray them, and that they used to be friends with the Jedi, and that they were allies, and they weren't there to hurt them.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot about both Rex and Wolf. Rex's reaction to this is that
Yeah.
he knows that something is wrong with Wolf. Maybe not wrong with him, but something has happened to make him this way.
Mm-hmm.
And all he needs is a reminder that that's not real. And that's why I love so much. I mean, I know we'll talk about the Bad Batch later, but I love so much. I can already see the connections between what they've just and what we know from Rebels.
Mm-hmm.
But Wolf, he seems in Rebels, like if we don't know anything about the Bad Batch, like pretend we haven't seen the episodes. In Rebels, he just seems like he's just scared, and
Yeah.
he doesn't want to risk getting on the Empire's bad side because we can assume that he knows what the Empire's bad side looks like.
Right.
And he thinks that maybe if he heads it off, then they'll be left alone and his
Yeah.
brothers will be safe. And he doesn't know these people, so why should he care about what happens to them?
Right.
He knows his brothers. And so I think that says a lot to him. I think he did wrong, but ultimately he knows that he did wrong, and he tries to make
Right.
up for it in the end. And that's the thing about Wolf, is that he's not one to shy away from what he's done. He will
Right.
do his job and try to make up for it.
Well, and especially because to me, there's kind of two factors here that are really involved. And one is, and I admit I'm not sure the exact details. As you said, he's very close with Plo Koon. Plo Koon is the Jedi who, as part of Order 66 in the movie, we see him like flying a fighter with some other clones, and then one of those clones wind up hearing Order 66 and shoot him down. My understanding is that we're not necessarily supposed to think that Wolf was one of those who fired on Plo Koon, but that it was the Wolf Pack, the group of other clones that Wolf was the commander of, who were all very connected to Plo Koon, that did that. And that's so that's a part of Wolf's story, is that he may not necessarily have done it, but it was his people who, his brothers, as you talk about, it's so important, who I don't think that he's mad at them for killing Plo Koon. I think he's really mad that they were mind controlled like that into doing this thing, and he carries the guilt of that. Am I on the right track there?
So the Wolfpack actually weren't the ones who ordered
Oh, okay.
Order 66 to Plo. Plo was leading a different group of clones. It wasn't the 104th at all, and we haven't been told where the 104th was during this. We don't know if they were on the same planet, Akado Nemoidia, as Plo Koon was, and they were just off doing something else, or if they were on a different planet. Now we see in Clone Wars not several times, but one time where the Wolf Pack is sent on a separate mission from Plo Koon, and Wolf leads them, and Plo is off doing something else, and then they meet back together. This was likely one of those same things. The Wolf Pack was off on a different mission. Plo Koon was leading a different group of clones because needs must at that point in the war. And Dave Filoni, I think, has actually confirmed that, because we knew what battalion it was or what clone group it was. I can't off the top of my head remember the number, but it was a different one. And I think someone asked Dave Filoni at a con once, or a celebration, and he was like, no, the Wolfpack did not have a part in that. They were off somewhere else. So yeah.
Okay, so I can put that aside.
We have that one nice thing to come out of Order 66. That
Dave Filoni saying something about the Order 66 that makes you feel better than you did before he started speaking is such a rare event that we should celebrate it. So I'm all for that. The other thing I was going to say, though, and again, I haven't seen those episodes in a little while, but this is my memory of it, and I wonder if you feel the same. And surely, even if it's not his story, I feel like this is a story for a lot of the clones. we as viewers have such a clear picture of the Jedi and the Sith and the, the scum and villainy folks and like all these different sides and all these different things. I think it's easy to forget that, like a lot of soldiers, especially child soldiers, which the clones are very much are, they have only learned the very specific things that the Kaminoans and then the Jedi and then what they've learned, taught them, and then what they've learned in the world. And part of the sense that I got, and that, as you said, Rex helps to remind him, and I think we've certainly seen this from other clones as well, is that there is a sense of like, well, first of all, it's not like before the chip, every thought I had was completely my own and completely, we were all always programmed, whether that is through other chip type things or just having, obedience bred into us, or just the way we were, trained at birth to think all these things. They've already had their mindset towards the Jedi deeply skewed and their mindset towards obedience skewed, combined with, as I said, not really knowing like all the intricacies that we do. I can well imagine sort of someone getting to the end of Order 66 and being like, okay, well, all these Force users, all this political machinations, all of it, I just want nothing to do with it. And that part of it for Wolf may be that making that clear distinction we can see of like, oh no, Kanan and Ezra, they're different. That's fundamentally different. Any negative feelings you had towards them was about the chip, not about this. That's not as easy for someone like Wolf, who you know, eh, particularly in some level, as you said, because it's so much about just protecting his brothers. And part of this might be like, if they get in trouble, we'll get in trouble too. And there's also some level of like, your friend's destructive ex, who maybe wasn't a terrible person, but kept leading your friend into like terrible situations, is back, and you're like, just don't, no, just like you got your heart broken with Ahsoka. You almost died. This person's gonna get you killed. Just dump them. Block the Jedi. Does that make sense? Kind of as a Wolf perspective as well.
I think so. A little bit. I don't know that we know enough of Wolf with to like on a level in canon to know like what exactly like how that would affect things. Now I have a theory based
Uh-huh.
on the recent Bad Batch episodes. If you don't talking a little bit about, just let me
No,
tying
let's
that
go
in
into
a
them.
little bit here. Is so in Bad Batch episodes we see that Wolf is still with the Empire, and he is adamant that this is what he wants. He is loyal to the Empire. This is his job as a soldier, and quite similar to some of the clones on season 2, the more like side clones who were like, this is our job, this is what we were meant to do, like can't do anything else, kind of like that. But he still has his like moral integrity intact, and you see
Mm-hmm.
that bit by bit throughout the episodes, in that he doesn't want to hurt anybody. He doesn't want to accidentally get Omega killed. he
Yeah.
he wants to be in charge because this will get done properly if he's in charge, not if anyone else is in charge. And in the end, he is able to let Rex go and listen to Rex and hear what he's saying to him. And
Right.
a thing on top of that is that he still has his chip in his head. And in Rebels, we see that as the scar, that it's been taken out.
Right.
And the thing about the chip is that it's not really been explained on like a scientific level in Star Wars, but I've seen
Mm-hmm.
people talk about how the way it acts isn't so much as a brainwashing, but as it puts signals into your mind that make you think that what it's telling you is what you have always thought.
Right.
And so it's more of a, not so much a brainwashing as a like in literally inserting feelings, and then it becomes so taken in by your brain and by everything, all of your memories and everything, that it becomes intermingled with them, and you can't separate what you used to believe from what you've been manipulated into believing, but manipulated on an
Mm-hmm.
internal level, not
Yeah.
just a psycho, but an actual like in your brain waves level. And that makes more sense to me than the
Yeah.
brainwashing. That allows
Mm-hmm.
us to see why some clones eventually get to the point without having their chip removed where they're like, this is wrong. We see it a
Yeah.
lot in the Bad Batch. Like, this is wrong. Shouldn't be doing this. I don't know how I got to the point where I am now. That makes sense to me because it's not so much it wearing off. It's the parts of your mind that aren't manipulated by the chip trying to take back over, I think. And or
Yeah.
pushing against that. And it's a very much like internal struggle. And I see that a lot with Cody. Cody doesn't know about the chips. He thinks that he Order 66 Obi-Wan. And he thinks everything he's done is his fault. And he's at a battle of how he could do that and still be the man that he knows himself to be. And I think that if Rex had stayed in the Empire, if Ahsoka hadn't saved him, that he would have eventually fallen down the same path as Cody. How did I allow myself to do this? I don't know what I've done. And Wolf, on the other hand, has always been incredibly determined about his loyalty, I think. And he's never really had it challenged that much the way that Rex did constantly. And as
Wolf was not there for the Plo Koon arc, correct? Yeah.
So, and he's also the one who ended up shocking Ahsoka. He chased after her with the wolf pack and shocked her and brought her back to the temple, or not even the temple, back to the Gar in the wrong Jedi arc. And so he's always been very determined to do his job and to be loyal to what he believes in. So when the chip manipulates his mind into Jedi are bad, Empire is good, Emperor is good, Emperor knows what he's doing, then his loyalty is naturally going to shift to that. More so, I think, and for longer than some other clones that we know well. And eventually, because he believes so much in that loyalty, he hasn't really had it questioned before, then he adapts to it instead of resisting it. And my question is, if we know he gets his chip removed in Rebels, could it be that they think that removing the chip might help Wolf overcome some of this confusion about, the Empire and everything? And the chip was just in his mind for too long. And that causes that paranoia that we see, that resistance and the Jedi appears of no, Jedi bad. But then he's able to overcome it the way that he wasn't before.
I love all that. There's a couple things there I want to jump onto. First, just I think you make such a good point about Ahsoka that, one of the easiest ways to be able to see through kind of lies and propaganda is when you have the visual experience right in front of you. If someone tells you this group is doing this thing, like, hopefully you don't believe that in general, but also just like, if you are with a person of that group and you are seeing them and you have that clear evidence, like, no, this is not the case. Rex has that. So Wolf doesn't.
Yeah.
But more to the point, I love what you said too, because I also think that, more to the point, I love what you said, because I think you're right. Gaslighting is a much better word than brainwashing for what I was talking about, in that, sorry folks, bad lungs. Because more to the point, sorry, give me 1 second to get back. Sorry, viewers, you get to see all the how the salami is being made. All right. But I also think you're so right that gaslighting is a better word than brainwashing, because obviously I think we're using the chip is the sort of technical way it happens. But I do think that what the clones go through, it is a kind of gaslighting of first being told from birth, the Jedi are always right, the Jedi are always good, trust the Jedi, all this kind of stuff. You're here to obey orders, not to give orders unless you're a specific commander. Don't question things. All of that is gaslighting. And then especially when it's now flipped on its side, like, oh, no, the Jedi are your enemy, blame them, everything is their fault. And one of the things I know, both as someone who has been very badly gaslit by both parents and a partner, but also who is very involved in that kind of discussions of those worlds, is that someone coming out of being gaslit, like, everything you're questioning now, because everything you're doing now is like, wait, was that really what I thought? Was that what I was manipulated into thinking? You're doubting yourself all the time because you're like, am I not being hard enough on myself? Do I need to take more responsibility here? And so when someone else comes along and is like, oh, that really, really sucked. I'm so sorry, but don't worry, you can trust me. Like that's just red flag central, and maybe deservedly, and maybe often not. I think your point there about Wolf just being And so I think your point there of Wolf just having this attitude of like, I trust my brothers. It's me and the three of us against the world, and I'm just not sure who to trust. And it is when Rex says you can trust the Jedi that's what helps him make that connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we also see that, like you said, that one common thread throughout everything we know about Wolf is his care for his brothers and how much he trusts. And we see that in the episodes too, because when they arrive on Teth, Wolf says, "These aren't insurgents; these are clones." And the CX trooper says they're both, and Wolf is like, "What?" And like his first thought when he sees these clones aren't that they could be his enemies; these are brothers. And then later on, when he has the kind of standoff with Rex, he listens to Rex. He lets Rex talk, and that I believe that's because of the respect that he has for him as a brother and a friend. And I also think that Wolf truly believes that the Empire is fair, just as fair as the Republic, in the same way that Cody did. And where Cody didn't really need a push, maybe he needed that final nudge to get him to actually do something, get away from the Empire or try to resist. I can see Wolf needing a lot more than that. Right. Because maybe Cody already doubted. We see that in the Bad Batch season 2. Cody was already doubting. He wasn't sure. He didn't think that he was doing the right thing already. He was trying to convince himself that he was. Whereas Wolf, I think, needs to convince himself that he's not. Yeah. And that's they're so similar. Their stories are so similar, so fundamentally different because they're different people. And I love that. I love that we get to explore that with these characters that the Republic and the Empire were just the same and just, cannon fodder essentially. But they're not. They're very different, and they react to these things very differently.
I mean, I will rarely hold up the Clone Wars movie as peak Star Wars in any way, shape, or form. But I do think that it's very important that it's the first introduction to telling the stories of the clones, because one of the main... Actually, now I said that, I don't remember if this is the Clone Wars movie or episode 1 of the Clone Wars. I think it's the Clone Wars movie. But a lot of it's about Yoda really helping the audience to understand. And I think, unfortunately, him kind of telling the clones themselves, but that they are each individuals, and really introducing us to the idea of, yes, the whole rest of the galaxy, including the audience in many ways, is going to see them as a collective, the clones. But the fact is that they each have their individuality, even if they have the exact same genetics, that they're all each different people, and they're all going to experience very similar things, but they're going to have different reactions to it.
Yeah, that's episode 1. And I love that it is, because I like that the movie is much more focused around Anakin and Ahsoka. That's understandably, right. Because Ahsoka is the new main character of this. And we get a little bit of the clones here and there in the movie, but it's not so much focused on them. And so I really like that the first episode of the show, of the series, is Yoda saying that to the clones, and saying, like, this, it starts off the series as like, this is about the clones, and they aren't what you thought they were. You think you know them, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, maybe a little bit of the movie, but you don't. They're individuals, and even the characters in this universe believe that.
Yeah. No, I think it's really true. It's really true. Let's get into the Bad Batch itself then, because we're in sort of this middle period, and people who know me know that I always have a little bit of a red flag about any kind of prequel, because to me, not only do you have to tell a story that continues, if you have, well, especially like a middle quel like this, mid quel, as I think Paul Hoppy coined, not only do you have to tell a story that fits with what comes before, but also with what fits after. So, even before that, let's just go on pure vibes alone. How did you react when that first Rex and then Wolfe showed up on screen?
Oh, Rex, I was expecting because he appears in the mid-season episodes consistently. So season 1, season 2, those are like his episodes, and like you get the story a little bit, you get to the story set up, and then Rex comes in and adds his piece there. And so I was kind of expecting that he would be in those middle 2 episodes. No, I knew that Wolfe was going to be in the show because he was in the trailer, but I didn't know when. And when I saw him at the end of episode 6, I was like, I think they do like a pan up, and as soon as I saw the like his shin armor, I was like, that's a wolf.
Yeah.
And I was like, I would know that anywhere. I was scared because the trailer that got shown to everybody, you can see him with other Imperial troopers, and I was like, he's with the bad boys. I don't like that. I'm scared. There's still hope that he's a contact for Rex. And then we see him at the end of episode 6, and he's being sent to capture Omega and to break up these insurgents. And I was like, okay, he could still be a contact for Rex, and that's how they get away. But he wasn't. And I was initially very sad, but also not surprised.
Right.
Because of all the things I've said. Like Wolfe, I think that sometimes Wolfe fans, and I include myself in this, view him as a little softer than I think he actually is. I think he is soft at heart, but not as easily as some people maybe headcanon him to be. And like I said, if you juxtapose him next to Cody, they're very different characters. And the more I watched it, the more I was like, okay, it makes sense that this is what he would think. This is how he would think if he was stuck in the Empire and he didn't have anyone rescuing him at the beginning. And then I saw that he was still himself. Like, he's still Wolfe. He's still grumpy. He still very much needs to be in charge, just like he is in the Clone Wars. And easily annoyed, very gruff, and also just very, he sticks to his morals. Even if he thinks that the Empire is good, he's still following orders in his own way, I think, is the way I would put it. And I was happy about that, because it doesn't wrap up his story in a nice little bow, because it never can be. And we know what Rebels Wolfe is like. There's going to be pain in there. And I can only hope that maybe there's not much more pain, but I have a feeling there might be. If we see him again. And
that's kind of what I meant about the prequel problem, because to an extent, if we get his whole, like, I don't necessarily think he has a redemption arc, but if we get his whole sort of hero turn in this show, then his arc in Rebels doesn't make any sense. You have to hopefully do some interesting things with him, but still put him in a position where his feelings by the time of Rebels, really, really makes a lot of sense. And I do think that in that regard, did you read the Republic Commandos books?
I haven't read them, but I know what happens in them.
So we've talked about them before on the show. They're part of the extended universe. They're not officially canon anymore, but it is very clear that from the beginning of the Clone Wars show, a lot of the ideas of that were being carried over, and more recent stuff has directly carried over ideas from it. And in it, you really get the sense of that by the time of Order 66 and beyond, for a lot of the clones, it's not about Empire versus Jedi. It's about, we are pawns in this war between these two sides. We're just going to step out of it entirely. And Wolfe, in some ways, strikes me very much in that, like, for him, it is about his brothers, not who's giving the orders one way or the other. And so I feel like his decision at the end, the fact that this is the Bad Batch, it's not about rescuing Jedi, it's not about fighting the Empire, it's specifically about, I am still on this side of the line, and some of my brothers are on the other side of the line, and I'm not going to cross the line, and I'm going to fight other people on the other side of the line, but when it's my brothers specifically, I'm going to look the other way. which to me makes his actions there at the end makes so much sense. Where he's not joining them, but he's also saying, he's telling the other troopers, those were our brothers, we owe them.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with that, but I also think that there's a lot of symbolism in the lighting of that scene where
Sure.
they're standing off from each other. So if you think about episode 4, the end of episode 4, when Crosshair and Omega are reunited with Hunter and Wrecker, and their ships are on either end of the little area they're reuniting on. And the light from each ship extends but doesn't meet in the middle.
Yeah.
And to me, that's symbolic of the very real gap between Crosshair and his brothers. And the light hasn't fully extended to meet each other because there's still issues between them, and there's still things that need to be resolved. And there's a gap between that bridge, and they have to rebuild that. In episode 7, at the end, when Wolfe is at a standoff with the Batch and Hauser and Rex, the lights from both of their ships do meet in the middle, and there's no darkness in between. And to me, I feel like that is maybe symbolic of Rex's words have gotten through to Wolfe.
Yeah.
And he's just not ready to do anything about it yet. And he doesn't know if he could. He needs to let it marinate for a little while. Yeah. And but that eventually, and we know eventually he will leave the Empire, and he will turn against them and go with his brothers. But I have to believe, like, there's something that makes him decide that. And I feel like Rex's words, if we ever get to see that, I don't know if we will, but that Rex's words there will be very much what caused Wolfe to take that different path. And I liked the way they had it set up too. Sorry, like so many.
No, please keep going. This is so good.
There's a scene where it's the camera, the way they have it filmed is Wolfe is like the closest to the screen, and then you have Rex in the middle, and then furthest away on Echo's ship is Gregor, and you can see Gregor standing there on the in the entryway to the ship. And it's Gregor, Rex, Wolfe. Gregor has already been saved by Rex. Wolfe hasn't, but he will be. And Rex is the one who brings them all together. And so I love that symbolism that maybe there never was a bridge, like a gap between them. It just needed Rex to say all of these things to help Wolfe.
No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. First, I'll just say I love that analysis so much. As I've said before, I'm not a very visual person. I don't catch things like that. But I'm 100% sure that what you're talking about is there, and that it is 100% intentional, because, and like during some Oscar discussions and other channels, I really got into how I think like animated content is not given the full respect it deserves. I thought there were some animated movies that really deserved more recognition, primarily Nimona and Into the Spider-Verse, but Across the Spider-Verse, but I've also heard that The Heron is amazing too. But that level of artistry, that level of movie making is just something I don't think we talk about, but is so there. And I was already wondering, like, if you think there are some parallels between Wolfe and Crosshair, and I think what you're saying definitely kind of highlights that. But also just like, because in one part, because what it reminds me of is when Crosshair has gone and had some of these experiences with like the new soldiers, and he doesn't feel like he fits, and he doesn't think what he's doing is right. And he's shown being alone in the room with where he and the Bad Batch used to be. And that also got me thinking of another redemption arc that I know you've talked about. You actually made a great TikTok about comparing this to Rex's, which I really appreciated, of Agent Callus, who is a big part of Rebels, and who doesn't get the screen time. So I think you're right. We don't have as much of an arc from him. But as with Crosshair, there's a scene where he's had a real moment of change, but he isn't quite ready to either accept that or to live that out. And he also goes back to the Imperial ship, and he's again shown to be alone. And I don't know if it'd be too on the nose or be perfect to have Wolfe have that moment as well. Because I think you're right. I think, and especially because also remembering that situation for Wolfe, it could be that Rex has like planted the seed and it needs time to germinate. It could be that Wolfe has already decided, F this, I'm 100% on the side of Wolfe, of Rex. But if I say that in front of all my troopers, they're going to shoot me. And so I need time to be able to figure out how to do this and to maybe convince some of them. So here's what I'm going to say so that they don't, like, I don't think it's one thing or the other. I'm sure it's a spectrum involving all of that. But yeah, I really like that analysis. And I think I'm now really excited to see where his story goes, because I feel like him going from complete obedience to being willing to break the rules for his brothers to being willing to risk his brothers and to accept the risk his brothers want to make for others who are not his brothers.
Mhm.
Like that's just that in that way, this would be the perfect middle part of where we get to with Rebels.
Yeah. I think it's also really important that Wolf's team that he's with, his little
Yeah.
the group he's in command of are all clones. So
Yeah.
it's not like, with Crosshair we've seen that he was in command of non-clone
Right.
soldiers,
Regs.
part
Yeah.
of Project War Mantle. And the times that he really started to kind of resist the Empire more was when he was with clones
Mhm.
and like in the Outpost episode. And so I think it speaks a lot about Wolf to say that his group was clones, that he's not working with non-clone soldiers most of the time. He's still leading clones, and it's easy then, I think, to see why he hasn't questioned the Empire yet, maybe because
Yeah.
to him it is essentially still the same.
Yeah.
He's still leading group clones. The only difference is there are no Jedi there, but he's been told that there's a reason for that. And so
Yeah.
I don't. I really do. I would love more like in-depth focus on him, kind of that we get with other like Crosshair. But one day.
Yeah. I hope so as well. I hope so as well. We're starting to have some internet problems. There's so much more I want to go into, but I think this is maybe a good time to wrap up, just in case our signal gets even more problematic. We are going to have some bonus content in a second. But Danielle, for those who want to hear more about your stuff, who want to hear more about what you have to say about the clones, and a lot of other great science fiction stuff and fantasy stuff, and there's all sorts of topics, where can they find you?
I'm on TikTok at Written in the Star Wars and Twitter at DannyS394. And I mostly talk about Star Wars, but when The Last of Us comes back, I'll be talking about that too.
Yep. I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome. Yeah, definitely follow Danielle. I've learned so much about Star Wars and all things like that from her. Check out all of her content. Of course, as I said, check out all the great content we're doing on theethicalpanda.com, as well as all the other True Story family of podcasts. On behalf of Danielle, myself, and also Aaron and Alex, who couldn't be with us, we have spoken. All right, quick question for you. So the two things I was thinking of asking you about on for the bonus content, we'll go pretty short. One is excitement levels and just initial thoughts about the Acolyte, if that's something you're
Mhm.
comfortable talking about.
Mhm.
And the second, and again, I want to give you an out for this if you don't want to go into it. Wolf Thirst.
Yeah.
I want to do that as respectfully as we can. No
Yeah.
discussion, no mention of any writings, but
Yeah.
celebration of without sexualizing you in any way through it. But I want to A, give you the right to say no thank you, and also B, if any point you're like, yeah, take that minute out, that's totally fine.
That's fine. That works with me.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Thanks for asking.
And of course. No, I think it's super important. Welcome back, members. So there's two topics I'm going to talk to Danielle. Welcome back, members. As always, thank you for your support. There's two topics we're going to quickly talk to Danielle about. We're going to talk about The Acolyte, which is a new show that's coming soon that we've heard a lot about. That very much seems to be if you support women's rights, you also support women's wrongs. We're going to have a great, not heroine by any means, interesting character set in an interesting time of the Star Wars story, the High Republic. But first, I do need to ask something, because I have seen you talk quite a lot about Wolf and your feelings for thoughts about Wolf. And that my understanding is, and that this is a good thing, you not only intellectually enjoy his story, but that he might be one of the characters who generates a little more thirst than some others. Talk about that, if you would.
Well, he's the love of my life.
Okay. Okay.
That'll long-time followers of mine know what I mean by that. But for those who don't, there was this audio going around on TikTok a couple of years ago that it was like, this is my husband. This is the love of my life. This is my boyfriend. And I
Uh-huh.
put different pictures of different clones on there. Rex is my husband. Wolf is the love of my life. And I can't
Mm.
choose between them. Simply can't. But I love Wolf primarily because I think that they sculpted him very nicely throughout the Clone Wars,
Mm-hmm.
and I have always wanted to see him in Bad Batch animation, just because I think all clones deserve to be seen in Bad Batch animation.
Mm-hmm.
It's so pretty and just really amazing what they're able to do with that. And so seeing him was very nice, but also there are some really, really talented fanfic writers for Wolf.
Mm.
And I think really reading their perceptions of him and ideas about him made me appreciate him even more.
Yeah.
And like on an intellectual level, and that just made everything else kind of like grow from there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I love him. He's the love of my life. What more can I say?
And I think that's awesome, both for everything about just that itself, but also about fanfic, because I think there's an awful lot of misogyny in how a lot of fanfic gets treated. It's seen as primarily for women, which I mean, in general it is, but it's been by no means exclusively. But also just that it's often seen as just like, oh, that's just porn for women. Um, and yes, there's a lot of smut in a lot of it, and smut can be a really good thing. I say this as someone whose partner has written a lot of very well thought out, incredibly fleshed out characters, smut for her particular favorite show, which is a Thai gay mafia show that 99% of you have never heard of. But I feel like, there's often great character development that happens, and that's something that more people need to pay attention to. And as you said, it's not canonical. I think it's totally fair for someone to say that author's take is not, how you see the character, but that in the same way that I feel like I can learn more about these characters by hearing your thoughts about them, fan fiction is just someone else writing their thoughts about these characters. It's just another way of having this discourse, and that some of that might just be, and here's a lot of thoughts, and then here's a lot of fun story. And then also that, the way that I think you learn a lot about a person if you explore like their thoughts, their feelings, and also how they interact with people romantically and sexually.
Yeah, and I think it offers you new perspectives of characters. I think too, like even if what someone says in fan fiction isn't canon, their perception of a character can open your mind to aspects of the character that you hadn't thought of before, or that maybe you didn't notice.
Right.
And I think that that's always really important, because it allows us to see these characters from multiple angles than just what
Right.
our own biases might lead towards.
Yeah. And I think that's true. I mean, we can make a whole longer episode about this. I'll just say I agree with that I think there's a lot more we can get into with that. There's nothing I can say about it. Oh, but I think it does lead to one question, because you are by no means the only person who I know who fangirls. I think that's a term that now we can apply to all genders. I certainly fangirl about things. Any gender can fangirl. But who fangirls for numerous clones. So my question is, do you think clones would be okay with polyamory?
Well, I mean, there's fanfics about it, so
I mean,
I could see.
This is
I
a
think
18 plus podcast, so I will say that the idea of the clones all sharing something together, which they often do, is a idea that's been explored in stories. But sorry, go on.
No, I mean, they care about each other a lot, so why not share a person between them?
Yeah.
One of them gets the person on a Friday, the other one gets them on a Saturday. I think they would be up for that. I think Fives would be up for that.
all polyamorous people eventually have to realize that the thing that makes polyamory essential, it's good to be self-examining of your feelings. It's good to be able to understand and recognize and not be controlled by your jealousy. But the thing that all people have to do to be polyamorous is use Google Calendar. So, yep, I understand the days of the week. Well, okay, so putting that aside, let's now talk about The Acolyte. For those who don't know anything, The Acolyte is a show. We still don't know much about it, but we know that it is going to be set during the end of the High Republic period. It is long before Palpatine is born. It is long before most of the characters in the Clone Wars era that we know are born. I think it's set. The Clone Wars is like 20 to. Phantom Menace is 30 years before the Battle of Yavin. Clone Wars is about 20. This is set like 150 years before the Clone Wars. Yoda is still alive, but the rest of them are probably not going to be around. And talk a little bit about, like, I know you were a big fan of the High Republic. You've talked about that a lot. how do you feel about this show and kind of it being placed as the end of that era and the beginning of this, and kind of and what your thoughts about what the show's going? Oh, and just I didn't finish explaining what it is. The idea of it's supposed to be a Sith acolyte. This is the beginnings of the kind of, or at least the next step of the Sith trying to slowly infiltrate and have a subtle effect on the events in the Republic and the Jedi that will eventually lead to Palpatine and everything after that.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I love the High Republic, so that was very exciting. I was a little nervous at first that people were going to expect too much of the High Republic book content to be in the show, but the showrunner is a big fan of the books, and she's worked with the authors,
Yeah.
or she's sought their advice on things. And one of the characters from the book series is going to be in the show. Played by the showrunner's wife, by Leslie Headland's wife, no less. So that's very exciting. And I got to see Leslie Headland talk at the High Republic panel celebration, and just everything she said about the High Republic, about how she approaches Star Wars and creating for Star Wars, just made me really excited to see what she's going to bring to the table with this. And there's a writer's room, multiple directors. So it really seems like this has potential to be something great. And the little bit that I saw, that I got to see at Celebration last year, made it seem kind of like Andor, but the tone of Andor maybe a little lighter.
Yeah.
Like more prone to a little bit more humor maybe, but with lightsabers.
Yeah.
So
I'm real excited. And tell us more about the High Republic, because I think for a lot of our listeners, like I hope people have read some of those books. They're phenomenal. I know for some people, like they just want to enjoy Star Wars on screen, and I think that's totally legitimate too. Um, you don't need to go in like specific characters, but just like what is the tone of this era that we need to, like, how different is it from the Clone Wars era or the later eras that we need to understand how that's going to shape this series.
So the High Republic book series, phases 1 and 3, I think take place about 100-ish, 50 years before the Acolyte.
Yeah.
And so it's slightly different, and the Jedi we see there are very different from the Jedi we know in the prequels. It's kind of known as like the golden age of the Jedi, really, and that's represented in or reflected in their attire. So their robes are like white and gold. Their lightsabers they're not having to fight that often, so the lightsaber doesn't need to be something that's easy to fight with. It can be something that's kind of showy a little bit.
Right.
So you get these really elaborate, really cool looking lightsabers that are also gilded, and you have a Jedi Order that hasn't known war yet,
Right.
and hasn't had to make these stipulations for their knights and their Padawans and their younglings to face war.
Right.
And they eventually do get a taste of that in this era, and that's what leads to all of the strict rules that we see in the prequels.
Right.
And so it's really just kind of an exploration of how something that was once so like magnificent and great and truly a light on the galaxy could get into the position where they're forced between a rock and a hard place in something that they never should have been involved in the first place.
Yeah.
And how do they get to that point? And that all starts with the High Republic book series, which isn't just books, it's comics, it's manga, and audio dramas, things like that. And I know that the Acolyte is supposed to be the kind of like, so this is what they used to be, this is where they're going.
Right.
And I don't know much else about that. I just know what the summary was that Star Wars released today.
Right.
But
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think, one of the topics that I love to talk about that I know you to discuss and many others is, how do we feel about the Jedi of the prequel era, and what role did they play or not play, or how did the role of the strictness of their rules affect people like Anakin or Obi-Wan and other things like that? And in book 1 of the High Republic, we're introduced to a character who winds up sleeping with another character, and she's like, "You're a Jedi. Are you allowed to do this?" And he basically says, "The Jedi let me be a fuckboy." Um, not in so many words, but he basically says, like, as you know, physical pleasure is okay. Developing attachments is more of the problem. He also, though, is like the classic, like, no, I just want to sleep with her. Oh my god, I love her. Like, he's just a beautiful bisexual chaotic mess of a character. But like, yeah, it's a very different attitude towards relationships. It's a very different, I think, a much more like the spirit rather than the letter of the law idea of attachments. Um, and I think, yeah, there's been a really interesting thing of seeing like how does that change and how does that maybe have its problems that leads us to more of the strictness of the prequels era. And it's not just that by any means. I think that's just the most like clearly seen one. But there's much more about sort of letting Jedi go as what are called way seekers, who are sort of Jedi who um they're still Jedi, but they're kind of like on walkabout. I'm not Australian Aboriginal by any means. I don't want to claim that term, but I think it's a similar kind of like they're going to go find themselves, and they're also just going to say like maybe like I think if Ahsoka's story had happened during this time, she would have not left the Jedi. She would have become a way seeker. She'd be
Yeah.
able to say, I still follow the tenets, but I need to be off on my own and not part of this institution. And yeah, I think there's so much interesting about that era, as well as, and if you've heard me talk about the prequels, you know this. I like manipulation that is subtle, where you're taking a feeling someone else already has, and you're just kind of softly blowing on the embers to gently push them in the direction of doing the thing they might have already done already, but you're making sure it happens. That's very different to me than wahaha, we're mind controlling them, we're using chips. Count Dooku is secretly lying all the time, etc. And I might get disappointed, but it feels to me like that's much more the role the acolytes can be playing here is kind of like, finding those folks within the Jedi who are concerned that the rules are too lax and maybe like just, blowing on those embers, just maybe giving that it's still going to be the Jedi who make these decisions, but the acolyte and the work that she's doing and that the other Sith are doing is kind of just, pushing that in the right direction.
Yeah. I think that one thing the High Republic book series sets up really well is this idea that the Jedi were prepared for Sith combating them,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't prepared for something else that
Yeah.
that could come after them, because you have the older Republic where the Jedi still had to fight the Sith and everything, and so they know that and they understand that, and I think maybe
Yeah.
they're prepared for that on some level to come back, but there's this greater threat and it's much more sinister in that it doesn't pick a side.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give too much away for those who haven't read it but want to, but there's this threat there that really the Jedi aren't prepared for.
Yeah.
And it instills this fear in them, I think, that they don't know how to fight back against this.
Yeah.
And something they've never been prepared for before, so they just shut down.
Yeah.
and and like the only way to prepare for this unpreparable thing is to close ourselves off
Yeah.
and start training younglings to fight, start making Padawans become Padawans much earlier than they used to, things like that.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to like watch it happen in this book series and be like, no, like,
Yeah.
but one day you'll regret this. And I think that makes, to me, it makes the prequel Jedi, it makes me empathize with them a lot, I think, because they were doomed by the rules set up by their predecessors.
Yeah.
And I think that was what makes people so angry with Yoda, is that Yoda was there, so he should know better. A lot of the rest of the council wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so that it's just really interesting to see, and I'm really, really excited to see how it all ties up with Acolyte.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's gonna be a fun story. I think we're definitely gonna do I'm gonna listen. I found that listening to books on tape, especially because I go on tape, really dates me. But audiobooks, I go along these road trips. It's perfect. I did recently listen to 20 hours of the later books of Dune while driving mostly at night through rain. Which those books are very, very weird, and I don't know if I like actually was seeing through space and time and understanding it. But the point is, I'm going to be listening to all the audiobooks of the High Republic before they come out, and we're probably gonna do another episode, possibly Danielle, possibly some other people who are really into High Republic, that really is a full primer of everything you need to know for the Acolyte. But yeah, I'm glad you're excited, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we go with it.
Yeah, be good.
So awesome. Well, Danielle, as always, thank you again so much to our members. You're what makes this possible. You keep the lights on. We have spoken, and stay classy, Coruscant. Bye bye.
Bye.